Hello, I'm John Baker. Welcome to our BARBEL video where we'll be discussing winter baits and tactics. Well, here we are again in the bait shed, and I shall be popping up from time to time to discuss winter baits, and who knows, I might even catch one or two fish myself. But let's go straight over to the bankside and our two experts, Stuart Morgan and Robb.
Yeah, thank you, John. Here we are in October. This is the beginning of me and Guy's winter campaign. What we tried to do is put everything that we've learned and observed in part one about location and all the little bits and bobs and the edges we've got, we try and put them into practice to catch that big fish in the winter.
And as before, a lot of the footage is done on camcorder equipment, so the quality may vary a little, but we hope it doesn't affect the enjoyment of the film.
Conditions in winter, what are we looking for?
Well, let's start with the weather. Today, as you can see, it's bright and sunny, very unusual for October, but sooner or later it's going to be rain, rain and more rain. So coloured water fishing, you better get used to it and how to handle it.
Yep, when the river's coloured and you can't see the bottom, you've got to rely upon all the knowledge you built up in the summer, and hopefully you would have made notes and you'll know exactly where to put the bait. The disadvantage, of course, is you can't see all the features, the depressions, the snags and drop-offs that we talked about in part one. The advantage, of course, is the barbel can't see the tackle, they can't see you, and they're definitely receptive to heavy feeding in these conditions.
On the subject of tackle, let's have a look at what we require in the winter. Obviously there's a lot more water on the river, debris coming down, so we have to step up the gear a good deal. So let's have a look.
Let's take a look at rods. Both me and Guy use very similar action rods in the fact that the test curves vary between Guy's, which is around 1.5 pound with a stepped up butt. Mine tends to be a 1.75 pound test curve. Test curves can be a bit misleading because both me and Guy agree the most important thing is the rod is strong enough to hold a big fish in very heavy floodwater, but it's got a nice through progressive action and doesn't lock up. Rods that lock up, typically the fast taper, big feeder, sort of heavy feeder type rods, they're not very good for winter barbel fishing. They're likely to result in hook pulls.
Well, my preference is an 11'6" rod for the winter.
And I prefer something slightly longer at 12 feet. Both rods are fitted with cork handles. The reel fittings do the same job but actually work slightly differently. Guy tends to opt for a rear winding mechanism that locks up from the butt up towards the rings. My rod's very similar, just does the opposite, where it screws this way and locks the reel in from the top of the rod towards the handle. The most important thing, I think we'll both agree on it, Guy, is that those reels mustn't move. Gone are the days when we used to accept the fact of the old wonky rubber and plastic rings to hold the reel in place that would inevitably work loose and drop off just as you're about to play a big fish. We both use these reels. In this case, these are Shimano bait runners. They're good, strong and reliable. The line lay tends to be pretty excellent on them, and importantly, they've got a good clutch. It's worth mentioning that while these reels are fitted with a bait runner facility, at no time do we advocate the use of people using them a la carp style by leaving the rods unattended. 99% of the time me and Guy fish with the rods held in our hand anyway, touch ledgering, or at least holding the rod in a front rest. But these things, basically, they're really, really handy for when you've netted a fish, for example, and they're good for paying out line, but we don't use them in the true sense of what they were designed for, but they are very handy.
Lots of good lines on the market. I choose 12-pound big game, mainly because I get it cheap.
And he's a cheapskate.
But the other uses are, it's just absolutely brilliant abrasive resistance, which you're going to need because the conditions are terrible. The other thing you need a real good strong line for is leads. You're stepping up maybe to 4, 5, 6 ounces in the winter and you need good tough line.
Well, these are typical of the leads that we will be using in the winter and showing you later on in the footage. They do vary from sort of 2 ounces right up to, as Guy said, 6 and sometimes even 8 ounces. They do take it out of your line, so I must admit I'm the same as Guy on this one. I opt for 12-pound line to be safe. Basically, we'll show you the rigs and what the setups are a bit later on in the video, but the main thing is your tackle's got to be able to stand up to it, rods and lines of casting these sort of things. When it comes to hooks, just make sure they're strong. Guy's preference is these fang hooks. I like trusty Continental boilie hooks. Basically, they're both very strong hooks. They're not liable to break on you. That'll do us.
Conditions. After a few days of heavy rain, branches, trees and everything's coming down the river. Take one look at this, stay indoors. Me and Stuart don't fancy that at all. Wait for a couple of days for the branches and everything to go through, and even though the water might be high, the fishing can be fantastic. Well, all that work that we put in on the summer trying to find all the spots can now pay off if we're lucky.
But you can make your own luck by making sure your bait's in the right spot at the right time. All well and good, of course, if you know the riverbed and you know the stretch of river you're fishing. But what about if you arrive on a stretch you've not fished before? What we need to then do is look at a set of criteria to find out where those barbel are. Firstly, let's look at the type of speed of flow that you should be looking for. In an ideal world, walking pace or a fast walking pace is about right, but it's critical that if you can find a stretch of river where the surface is smooth, almost like glass, odds on that's where the barbel are going to be. This is because that smooth surface water probably indicates that the bottom is either sand or gravel with no major snags present. The only exception to that when looking for surface kind of movements that identify where barbel live are dead weed beds. Typically rushes, when they die back in the winter, they still obviously don't die completely and there's still stalks on the riverbed. What happens is the flow hits these, the turbulence boils to the surface, and then it gives away the indication that that's where that weed bed is. Sometimes the barbel can be tucked behind it and it's well worth casting directly behind the boil. Sometimes they can be foraging around actually in the dead roots and the stems of the weed bed. So don't neglect those boils and write them off, because it could just be they're harbouring lots of barbel in a dead weed bed.
Yeah, another great place the higher the river gets is the inside of bends. This seems to work on most rivers I've ever fished. The barbel just seem to tuck in there out of the flow. Another brilliant place is where two rivers join. You can actually see the two colours of the different rivers mingling at some point, and the barbel just seem to sit in there out of the way, probably feeding on what's getting washed in by the other river. One place that we never fish when the river is high are snags. They're absolutely useless. Now, Stuart's already told you about how we look for boils on top of the river. Well, how do you know if the boil was a nice dead weed bed or a snag? Well, what we do in terms of trying to find out is a good series of leading around on the river.
Leading around, a good way of establishing what the river or what's on the bottom of the river before you start fishing. Never ceases to amaze me how many anglers will turn up on a river and start fishing without even knowing what the riverbed's like. If we took this into another stage and you looked at gravel pit fishing or any other form of carp fishing, no, not many anglers would start fishing at all until they knew exactly whether it was gravel or silt and what they were fishing over. We think it can be just as important even though it's a river. Now, to do this, me and Guy both use the same method. And what we actually do is good if you've got a braided mainline for this on a spare rod. We tie on a fairly heavy lead, I'd suggest probably 3 or 4 ounces if you can get away with it, and cast it in a series of arcs, working your way downstream from one point in the river to maybe 30-40 yards down below. Feeling along the bottom, and that's where the braided mainline comes in. You can tend to easily distinguish whether you're caught on branches, weed, nice gravel, sand, or even into silt. And what we do is just progressively work that further and further downstream, and we build up a nice picture of what the riverbed's like. And from there we can work out where we're going to put the bait and then where we're going to fish for them.
Yeah, and there's nothing better than leading around on the river. You see a nice flat spot, casting into it, and it goes dink, 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 dink on the lead. Lovely gravel bottom. Big fish time, here we go.
Old Guy's dink, dink, dink when he's found a gravel bed tends to be a bit different when you're looking for weed beds. It tends to be all spongy and horrible, almost like silty, as though when you cast the lead out, you'll drag it back and you'll feel sort of just a stodgy sort of mess on the bottom. That can be quite interesting, because normally behind the weed beds and where they grow is a big patch of silt, or maybe if you're lucky a big patch of Guy's dink dinky gravel. One thing for sure is, when you find a snag, the lead will normally lock up solid. You'll be lucky to get the lead back, but if you do, you now know where not to fish.
Of course, if you've done your homework, as we did in part 1, and you know the river well, you'll be able to position your bait on the patrol routes. They don't look any different now, except there's 9 foot of coloured water over the top of them, but to the barbel, they're still at home there. The only thing I would say about patrol routes in the winter is the fish may have moved 6 or 7 feet up and down them one way or the other to the most comfortable spot within that patrol route area. So you may have to search around the river a little bit, but keep close to those areas because the fish won't be far away.
Yeah, that's right, Guy. And even though those fish do tend to move around within the confines of their comfortable area, one other added benefit of the coloured water is they're quite happy to feed all day. The colour gives them the confidence to stay out in an area where they never would in the summer, so you don't have to wait until night to catch them. What's important though is to get a bait in the right spot any time of the day and make sure they can find it.
Yeah, and a great tip in these conditions when the barbel are out looking is to give them something they can find easily. And a great tip for letting the barbel find a bait is to get a boilie and to wrap some paste around the boilie. Now what tends to happen is when the bait's been in the water a long time, the paste breaks down slowly and you get a great deal of flavour and smell going all the way down the river, which attracts the fish to it. But the bonus is, once that's washed away, the boil is still there, so you actually have a bait in the water that can withstand a period of time, whereas the fish can find it.
In the extreme flooding conditions, another added bonus is you never see any other anglers on the bank. It always amazes me in such good conditions how few anglers want to venture out onto the banks to fish in those flooded, horrendous, messy conditions. But me and Guy are normally out there. But in these conditions, even Mr. Robb here doesn't venture out from his cosy little lounge. I must admit, I know this fishery very, very well, and it's imperative that I did so because I know where the bankside stops and the river starts. When the river bursts its banks with coloured water, it's very, very difficult to see and you could easily get yourself into serious trouble. So I would advise, unless you know the venue extremely well, don't bother fishing in these conditions. It's just not simply worth the risk for a fish. In this case, I used a small boat to paddle myself across some flooded fields that were way over welly depth. They were probably 2 or 3 feet deep. So I used the boat to get to a spot that I knew that once I arrived there, potentially was going to be full of barbel. This was the only spot on the river where the barbel were packed into because everywhere else was just too fast and too turbulent. And when you do find a small area like that, all the barbel within probably a quarter of a mile could be bunched up in the same 30 yards. It's fill your boots up time.
Of course, not all floodwater conditions are very good. Sometimes it can be absolutely useless. The reason for this normally is temperature.
In an ideal world, what we would be looking for, what we're hoping for, is about 44 degrees with a rising temperature.
But in reality, what you can sometimes get is a fall in temperature, full of snow melt and road salt. Absolute waste of time.
Of course, not all cold water conditions are bad conditions. When the river's stabilised and the temperature's just levelled off, it can actually recover to being quite good fishing.
Well, let's take a look at a freezing cold day in January and see how well we did.
Well, the air temperature's 2 degrees, and more importantly, the water temperature is just under 37, so it ain't going to be very easy.
That's not bad for January. It's been freezing for the last 2 weeks, high pressure every single night. But last night a low came in, and that normally triggers off a very good pattern of feeding on the barbel.
Yeah, I think we got a chance, albeit a slim one. The good news is obviously we've got a choice of swims because there's no one else fishing, and the bad news I suppose is we've got some road salt that's washed in off the roads and it's now in the river, so we'll give it a go.
Well, Stuart was right about the road salt. A couple of days later things had improved a bit and Stuart was soon into fish.
That's a barbel. Not very big, but welcome on a day like this. Side of its scissor there. God, it feels cold. That water's really cold. It's about 39, 40 degrees. Look at that. Brilliant. Wow, that water is cold.
A good idea when you are fishing around in the winter is not to put too much bait in. The fish won't be moving around so much, but put the bait in where the fish are. The location is very important. Not too many freebies. In the really cold conditions in the winter, it's not very advisable to put a lot of bait in. The fish aren't going to be eating very much, so if they come across a bait, really, you want it to be your hook bait. So what I tend to do is just trickle little bits of paste into the swim, and if there's any barbel around, they're very soon on your bait. If you've been there for a couple of minutes and haven't had a bite, move on because the fish aren't close by. When it's very, very cold, that's all the amount of bait that I need for a day's fishing. One little ball of paste equivalent to a 1 egg mix. Take a piece of that paste and just mould it around that little piece of cork, which has been perfectly weighted against the hook. So when a barbel picks that bait up, it only feels the weight of the bait and not the hook. It doesn't really bother me how cold the water is in these conditions. I mean, if you've driven all the way there and it's cold, you've got to fish anyway. And I think if you're fishing a stretch that isn't fished very much, probably because of the cold conditions, you're always in with a chance, because the barbel haven't eaten for days, so if you put a bait in front of them, more or less on impulse, they'll eat it. Of course, in these really low cold conditions, you're back to summer rigs again, really. The presentation's ever so critical. You need to be on small hooks, small baits, clear line, just as before. But of course, most of our fishing in the winter is not like that.
Now I must admit, in my view, when it's freezing cold and clear, you do catch a few barbel, but for the effort you have to put in to catch them, I hardly think it's worth it. But when conditions are good...
Oh, I'm in. It's on. Of course, pulling a fair old bit. Got to be a bit careful. There's a tree in the water just down here. It's trying to get under the branches. Very tight little swim, this. Little fish is getting right under the bank. Amazing strength, these fish. I think it's the biggest in the world, but it's having a real old scrap. Now, Steve, when you think you've got them, that's when you're in trouble.
Yeah.
There, nice little fish. I caught that on a 12mm boilie with a little bit of paste moulded round it. Now we make this paste in a very special way, and I'd like to take you over to John Baker in the bait kitchen to show you why we do it.
Well, thanks, Guy. Although I'm not actually in the bait kitchen at the moment, I'm on my local stretch of river and conditions are perfect, with water temperature at 48 degrees and about 2 feet of flood water on. Well, what we're using today is my good old faithful original barbel mix with Barbel Search for flavour, which I've made in both paste and boilies. But I've only actually been pre-baiting for 2 days. Conditions are good, and that's all it should take to get the fish well onto the bait. About 4 handfuls in that gravel area out in mid-current there, but just where you can see the scum line. 3 or 4 handfuls every day in the evening, just for a couple of evenings. And the recipe I used was 6 large eggs, 3ml of Barbel Search for flavour, and 5ml of Spectrum bait soak, just for taste. I should have them climbing up the rod with any luck. Anyway, we'll see. Here we go, I've got a fish here, look. Well, this fish certainly wanted that. Amazing fight in this fast water. Absolutely incredible. I mean, that fish nearly pulled the rod off the rest. Well, what I did there, we caught 1 or 2 fish now. So what I decided to do was a trick that Stuart Morgan and Guy Robb have mentioned earlier on, and that's to just mould a thin film of paste around the outside of the boilie. Just improves the attraction of the bait in this sort of colder water, plus the fact we have caught a few now, and I think they're definitely getting a bit wary. Well, you catch 3 or 4 fish from one swim and they definitely get spooky. Well, if ever a bait was aptly named, Barbel Search for Flavour certainly was. What we'll do is go back to the bait shed and I'll show you how we make up the paste that we use to wrap round the boilie and catch this fish. Well, here's the paste. Original Barbel mix paste that we discussed down on the bankside. You've got two options of making it up. The one that we used was a stronger paste for winter, stronger flavour that is, 3 ml of Barbel Search for Flavour and 5 ml of Spectrum bait soak, which is a multi-purpose additive with lots of different extracts to give a really good taste. An alternative to using Spectrum is the liquid yeast extract, which is very savoury, salty and imparts a delicious taste to the paste. This is very important. Nice and sticky paste, ideal for wrapping round a boilie or putting around a cork ball. The consistency is very important, so when you make the paste, remember not to put too much powder in and to put it into the plastic bag before you go fishing when the paste is still quite soft. After about an hour it'll harden off and be a perfect paste for winter fishing. You can also, to make the paste a little softer, add a little oil to the mix, about 2 to 3 ml per egg. Emerald oil is a good choice, which is a blend of specialty nut oils and soya oil, or you can use any good quality cooking oil, even olive oil, and it keeps the paste soft during very cold water conditions. Another good winter bait is the block bait, which you make by using the same paste that you make boilies or paste from, but you make a sort of pate with it, roll it out into a flat section and boil it in the bottom of the wire basket for about 3 or 4 minutes. Leave it to stand and cool, and the texture that results is a softish texture on the inside. Here's a little section I've cut off with a harder crust on the outside. The flavour leakage from this type of bait is fantastic, so it makes block baits even better for winter use than in the summertime. Each time you go fishing, you can cut a fresh section in any size or shape that you want. Particularly effective, and until now quite a secret tactic for using bait. Really, really effective and very, very different. In effect, what you're doing is making your own unique piece of luncheon meat, but it contains no meat whatsoever. Another useful winter trick to use with block baits is a dip. In this particular instance, a good one is the Spectrum bait soak. Here's a piece of block bait that I've mounted on a hair rig. In it goes into the Spectrum, and this is just before you cast out. Look at this, absolutely irresistible, perfectly mounted, coated with smelly Spectrum dip. What barbel could resist that, I asked myself. And talking about barbel, I think I can feel a couple more fish coming on. One of my favourite methods of barbel fishing is actually to float fish. Sometimes barbel can get wary of a static bait, so float fishing, even in flood conditions, is an absolutely deadly method of catching them. As I said in part 1, Stuart and Guy rekindled my enthusiasm for barbel fishing, and I think when you fish for other species you can learn a lot more about fishing in general. You can certainly make new friends, and that's what I've done with barbel fishing, and there's still loads more to do. A good trick with PVA string is to mould little pieces of paste around the PVA, which gives a tremendously quick leakage of flavour after you've cast it out. It's a method and tactic which very few people use, but it's one that I use every time I cast out in wintertime. Contrary to popular belief, a good bait doesn't need to be pre-baited for weeks on end before it can be effective. If you know the topology of the river and you have a good idea where the barb will live, just 1 or 2 baitings before you start fishing will soon have the barbel locked onto the flavour and recipe that you're using. One of the most important things is not to get sidetracked into always fishing in front of heavy snags. With a good bait and flavour, you can draw the fish upstream out of the snag and fish for them during difficult conditions in calmer, easier water, as I'm sure Guy and Stuart have already explained. Well, as you can see, it hasn't taken long to get these fish on the feed. There's another one comes in to the net. They're obviously really wanting the bait. So what we'll do is we'll go back into the bait kitchen and I'll show you how to make up the recipe that we've been using today to catch these fish. Well, that was a bit of fun, bit of winter action. What I'm now going to do is talk to you about alternative bait recipes, flavours and additives, and how to use them. There's an aspect of winter baits which is really important, and that is how much bait we actually use when we go fishing. It's important to remember that the barbel's metabolism is a lot slower during cold water temperatures, and they don't actually need to eat a lot to sustain their life. So what we often do in the wintertime is use less bait, but use it in a more focused way. And perhaps this is why the trend for very high protein, milk protein baits has come back. It's a tactic used by carp anglers who have gone over from carp fishing to barbel fishing, much like me. One of the baits that I use is super milk. There's been a lot talked about milk proteins, the whole idea being that the bait should contain all the nutrients that the fish require to sustain their life, which is protein, fats, carbohydrate, minerals and vitamins. It's just that with milk proteins you use very high levels of easily digested protein in the hope that the fish get a ready meal in one go without having to eat too much. Now, how this makes a barbel more easily catchable is a very difficult subject, but it certainly inspires a lot of confidence to those people who believe in the use of high protein baits. I think that people that use high protein baits are actually probably going to be good anglers anyway. They're investing a lot more money in their bait, and therefore their methods and tactics are likely to be more thorough. The most important thing to remember when using high milk protein baits is that the flavours and additives you use with them are kept to an absolute minimum level. One final thing to remember about using high milk protein content baits, or in fact any baits, is that you don't boil them for too long for barbel fishing, and that you make sure you use them when they're fresh. Don't refreeze previously frozen bait, and when you pack up and finish your session, throw the bait in, providing it isn't disturbing other anglers. Well, I'll be back later to talk about flavours and additives, but meanwhile let's go over to Stuart and Guy on the bankside. That's right. Yes. It's a bit precarious standing here. Doesn't feel that. There we go. Yes! That'll do!
Caught that fish on a PVA stringer, as you just saw. There's lots of applications for PVA, so let's go and take a look at some different ways of using it. I must admit, I find myself using PVA in one guise or another now, pretty much for all of my fishing, be it summer and winter. I don't think there's a more accurate way you can get freebies close to your hook bait on the bottom in a flowing river. I've experimented with bait droppers, big and small, over the years, and whilst they're pretty good if it's not much flow under the rod top, as soon as there's a lot of flow, the current tends to pick up the bait dropper and they land on their side, and I think by the time they've opened, the bait could be 20 yards downstream. So I must admit, I've dispensed with them now, and I pretty much rely upon PVA all the time. Okay then, let's take a look at stringers. Different types of material that you can make stringers from. The first one, this one here, I use for boilies and for paste, and it's made out of PVA string. PVA string's available by most manufacturers now, and they all tend to basically make the same product. One thing I will say though is they all tend to melt at different rates, so bear that in mind, because when you're fishing in the winter, you actually want to ensure that it's melted and that the freebies bowl off down the river. What happens if you don't is you put the stringer onto your hook, you cast it out, and it's still there 10 minutes later, and you get fish come up and you get what we call stringer bites. Rod top knocks often indicate that you think you've got bites, when in fact it's the fish plucking at the stringer giving you false bites, so we try and avoid that as often as possible. Next up is PVA tape, fishnet tape. This particular tape is very good for softer baits, and I often use it when I'm fishing luncheon meat or soft paste baits. It tends to be quite grippy, and you'll find that soft baits don't slide up and down it because they tend to kind of grip onto the material far better than it does with string. It's quite stretchy as well. Melts pretty fast though. Use that all summer and winter. When it comes to using the stringers, sky's the limit really. Sometimes I make these and they're probably 18 inches, 2 feet long, and they contain probably 30 or 40 baits if I want to really bait a tight area around the hook. More commonly though, I've probably got 6 or 8 pieces of bait on there. Good tip is, if you are using boilies, break them in half. A, it ensures that the flavour leak off's a lot better, and B, being that shape, it tends not to make them roll off out the swim and end up in the estuary. Using them is very straightforward, dead easy. If you've got a loop in the top like that, you can just hook it over the hook. If you've got a longer length, you can tie it onto the swivel or the lead. Last up, and in my opinion one of the best, is PVA bags. Only one drawback to this product, and that's the price. They are expensive. There's 2 different types. The type of bag here, this one happens to be a gardener one, but plenty of other people make them, so find a mate you like and stick with it is what I suggest there. And then there's this mesh type material. I've got pellets in this one, stocking type stuff. It's all the rage at the moment in the carp world. I must admit, it's not my preference because I've got clumsy fingernails and I keep catching it and laddering it all over the place. So if you get on with it, use it because it's just as good, but these I find simpler and a bit more robust. Very straightforward to use. A few boilies or whatever your hook bait is. In this case I'm going to put some boilies in there. Always find sometimes I bulk it out with pellets, especially in the summer, but they're also good in the winter at times for attracting. Fill up the bag. A few more baits for good measure. And to seal them, I like just to simply get the top of the bag, lick along the top, fold it over, and that seals it. At the moment there's lots of air trapped in there, so it's important before you cast it out, you basically just put a few holes in the bag. Otherwise you don't want the bag melting and floating back up to the top and then off down the river. So you just simply nick your hook through the actual material, tie it onto the lead, whichever you prefer. That will go in the river. When it melts, just take a look at what happens and how good that looks on the bottom. As you can see, we've shown the footage here in shallow water, but this applies to whether it's 12 feet deep, 2 feet deep or 2 inches deep. The effect on the bottom is still the same. PVA bags are available in all different sizes, but I must admit I found this size, around the size of the palm of your hand, about right for the right kind of quantity of bait for each swim basically. Me and Guy both use these all the time, especially in the floods. There's no better way of getting freebies down on the bottom right by your hook than a PVA bag. When I said PVA bags come in all sizes, I wasn't joking. What might you think am I going to use a PVA bag this size for? But there is a use for it, and I'll show you what it is now. Needless to say, I've sourced this PVA not from a tackle shop because I don't think anybody actually sells bags or sheets this big. And I'm not going to reveal where I buy it from. That's another little edge. Firstly, place a heavy object, 1 big stone or 3 small ones in this case, in the middle of the sheet of PVA. Next, get your bulk feed. In this case it's pellets, any quantity you like. Mound them up in the middle. Next, add some particles. In this case it's going to be meat, a few boilies, maybe a few broken up boilies. And to finish, gather the 4 corners together, hold it up, screw it round in a ball, and tie the top with PVA tape, just to keep it shut. And to finish, I just trim off the excess. As again with the other PVA bags, put lots of holes in there to make sure it sinks, although it shouldn't have a problem with great big stones in the bottom. And that's the finished article. One lot of bait on the riverbed, sinks like a brick, hey presto. Or you can just get your hook and nick it through the roost area of PVA at the top and just lower it down. You'll need a big rod to do it, mind, because it's quite a weight, but it'll go straight down to the bottom, melt, and you've done all your baiting up in one go. Using these big PVA bags is my edge. Because you can't normally buy them in the tackle shops, you can make them as big or as small as you like, and you can get any quantity of bait on the bottom. So I class that as my little edge. Obviously there is another way of getting bait down to the bottom that doesn't involve PVA string or tape or bags come to that. It's a cheaper alternative and it's a ground bait. JB's knocked me up a special ground bait that I use, which is basically almost like a base mix. It's a very strong fish meal ground bait. I use it in the winter because it's very oily, very stinky, and it really gets the fish drawn up in the current. So basically if we take a look at what we've got here, I've mixed this ground bait up to a fairly dry consistency at the moment with just plain water. But a little tip there is, into the water, before you put the ground bait in, put in some of your flavour from your paste or whatever flavour you're going to use in your hook bait into the water, and it makes it nice and smelly. Lovely. If you fancy, you can put some additives in. Again, once you've mixed the stuff in with water, no problem. Afterwards, bit of fish oil certainly makes it bind very well. And if you really want it to stink the kitchen out, I normally do this at home, you see, but I'm doing it on the bank just to show you now. I just add some gooey additives in there. Got this one, it's John Spectrum bait soap, but you can use anything you like for that. Give it a good mix. Get it well mixed in there. And then we just got one final ingredient to add. Into the mix goes then any little freebies or any hook bait samples. Got little bits of meat in there, broken up boilies. I add those into the mix, along with a good couple of handfuls of tiny little pellets. It keeps the barbel searching around on the bottom for a while. And that's the basic mix done. Just get the mix together, squeeze it in, and you find it should bind up quite well, not be too stodgy, and that's your finished item. All your little food particles in there, that goes down the riverbed, breaks down, offers quite a lot of food in the little freebies and the little bits of broken up boilies and what have you, but not too much to fill them up. Really good way of getting bait to the bottom if you don't want to use PVA. If you do decide to give ground bait a go, I like to fish it on an inline method feeder. Take the inline feeder, get the ground bait, push it round nice and firm, and if you've made it to the right texture, it should grip quite well onto the outside of the feeder. And that's basically the way to fish that there. I've got that on a reasonable long hook length. Just as a something worth mentioning, I suppose, when you've got a short hook length on there, some of the carp guys use hook lengths about that long, 2 and 3 inches long. I find that devastating for chub, but not so good for the barbel. I always find a hook length of probably 9 or 10 inches is the best length when it comes to fishing for the old whiskers. Here's a clever little gadget. It's a bait bomb designed to make big plugs of cylinders of ground bait and to be put onto the line. I don't actually use it with ground bait, but I'll show you how. I've got another use for it, and I'll show you how I do that now. Take some small pellets and pour over the top of it with some warm water. Obviously I normally do this at home, but I'm doing it on the bank today. Just make sure the pellets are well covered and get a good soaking. Leave them like that for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, and it should look something like this. Basically a big sticky mess. That's just about ready now. Add a couple of dry pellets in there, and then this is what we do. Take the cylinder, push it down, and stuff loads of the mushy pellets into the hole. You'll find this tool has got a slot, and you'll see what use that has in a minute. You locate it onto there, onto a flat surface, and you have to push quite hard, and the result should be, if I can get it out, a cylinder of compressed pellets. It's quite hard, tap it, you'll notice that the edge of that forms a hole, and I'll show you what the use of that hole is now. Because you take your rig, you put it so the hole is the lead end, You put the tubing on this rig or your main line through the hole, you move it up the line, and most of your lead in the swivel sits in that hole quite nicely, and the weight of it rests there like that. That'll stay there quite firmly. You can leave it overnight to dry, and if you do that, they'll come out almost rock hard in the morning. But I'll tell you something, when you've got that rig in the water, it starts to melt pretty quickly, and the attraction level and all the oils out of the pellets is phenomenal, summer and winter. Of course, PVA suits more of a static method, which is fine for me, but old Guy here tends to get a bit bored, so he's got a different method that he uses for a roving approach.
One of the nicest methods in the winter is to try and roll the bait down the swim and encourage a barbel to pick it up sort of as an opportunist rather than anything else. It's a bite. We're in one. Just rolled that bait round into the edge and it came in close to the rushes and bang, picked it up. They don't know their own strength, these fish. Don't feel like a very big fish. That's not holding deep and slow like they normally do, but it's giving a good account of itself. Come on, up you come. Easy. Yes. Well, that was fun. Well, here's that fish you just saw me catch when I was rolling a bait down into the rushes. As you can see, it's been really whacked by a big pike there. The rig I use for that I call my combi rolling rig, and I'll take you back and show you how I made it. This is the best winter rig that I've found bar none, because I hate sitting still in the winter, because the fish, they're not sitting still, they're all over the place in the winter when there's coloured water, and this rig is brilliant. I call it a combi rig. All it is 12-pound big game all the way through to a swivel, then a further 4 or 5 inches of big game, which I've tied to a knotless knot and leaving about an inch long hair sticking over. So what I'm going to do is use the flow of the river to bounce this bait along the flow, looking for feeding fish. Now the idea behind it is to have just enough lead to hold bottom. So if you want to dislodge the lead, you can do that easily, and the flow will take it down about 10 foot, stop for a couple of seconds, gives time for the fish to pick the bait up. And the actual weight is the vital part. Equally, if you come to a swim that's a bit still or inside of a bend, or you've had a cagey bite there and you want to swap to a hair setup, this is where this little piece comes into its own, and I can change from one rig to the other very simply. So in the winter, when the water is coloured, the good old luncher meat comes back off the dog and it comes into its own, because in coloured water they seem to love it. They're not worried by the sight of it and they just grab it on sight. I think it's a terrific winter bait. But as I say, if I get to those places where I can't get a bite or the water's a bit still, I'll take the luncher meat off. I then simply get one of these Drennan stops and pop it on the end of the hair. Like that. I'll then we'll get a little bit of paste, mould it round the hair stop, as such, and then I would change this smaller lead for a lot bigger lead. That's why I use a clip swivel. I can then fish a hair rig setup instantly. Then when I become bored with sitting there on the hair rig set up, I just remove the paste and the boilie stop, and I'm back to the meat. And I'm moving again.
Here's a good rig. It's one of my favourite ones for using when the water's cold and the fish don't tend to be very, hungry and they're not eating very much. It incorporates a short braided hook length and, more importantly, a very small hook. That's a size 10 on there, on a small hair rig, and attached to that is the smallest piece of paste or boilie you can get away with. It's amazing how the barbel, when they're not that hungry, will quite often pick up small offerings and ignore a big boilie or a big piece of paste. So that's a really good one to use when things get tough. I've incorporated this rig in the film to show you what we use when it's flooded. Seems to be now we get floods come October all the way through till March. You're going to need some big leads to hold the bottom, and we find that these shaped leads with the little dimples on the bottom of them stop the lead being dragged out of position. Anti-tangle tubing stops any tangles, of course, and also stops the line being damaged by floodwater debris that's being washed down in the water. And it's a good idea to maybe use paste instead of hair rigs in the winter, because you don't want any unnecessary hang-ups and the hook getting caught on the bottom all the time. So that pretty much represents our basic floodwater barbel rig. Night fishing can be well boring. Always make sure you fire off a few false flash gun shots. Let all your mates think you're catching when you're not.
During the daylight hours, I go to an awful lot of trouble to let people know where I'm fishing.
Then come nightfall, we always move to where the fish really are. You in? Is it barbel? Not very big. That didn't go to plan. I'm downstream, I'm always meant to get the best bites.
One nil.
You in again? All right, Mr. Robbo. The big uns are down here on the crease. There's usually quite a few small ones in this swim, actually, so. It's tiny. Little baby barbel. Two more baby barbel than I've caught, though. Oh, that feels better. Yep, that is a definite bigger fish. It ain't no 3-pounder, boy. It's coming in close now. Yeah, that's a better fish. Oh, she's given up. Oh, straight in. Oh, well, that's a bigger one anyway. Caught on that big bag of PVA bait that we put in earlier. Talking of bait, I think we better go back with JB in the kitchen and talk more on the subject. I'll get her back now. Whoa. She goes. Great stuff.
Been kippered up by the phantom stroke puller of Chippenham yet again, who's caught the bigger fish. He does this every time I come down here, and John Baker will tell you the same.
Yes, I agree with you, Guy. But what about that Bristol Avon fish? When we got our own back on Stuart, I seem to remember conditions were great, with temperatures rising. and I beat Stuart to that comfy garden swim near the car. Just changed that, Stuart, put a little stringer on.
Yeah.
And I've moulded some paste around the boilie.
No, good method that is. Not ready yet. Goes. It's a nice fish.
Well, that was one time I did beat Stuart on his home ground, and that fish was a good one, about 8 or 9 pounds, fought very well in the heavy flow. But what I want to get onto now is my favourite subject, additives and flavours. Big subject, lots of controversy, excellent for winter fishing. Most baits and flavours will work for barbel, but some will definitely work better than others. And the most important thing I can tell you about using flavours and additives in bait is that once you've found 1 or 2 good additives that really work, stick to them and learn how to use them in varying conditions. This is really important. Another important aspect is that you don't put too much flavour in the bait, and that when you do use it, you measure it very accurately. Quite a lot of people in the bait trade will tell you this, but it is very important. That's why it's particularly important to always use a syringe. When you're using top quality flavours and additives to go in the bait, it's really important that you use a syringe to measure everything dead accurately. Keep a note of everything that you use, write it down, and remember that all the flavours and additives you use for the free offerings should be kept at a very low level. Low levels of flavour for free offerings, and you can up the flavour very slightly for the hook bait only. That doesn't really matter because you're not going to be throwing too much of the heavily flavoured hook bait mix into the river. When Stuart helped me to develop the barbel baits initially about 5 or 6 years ago, I was really enthusiastic about it because I knew that most barbel anglers just wouldn't go to the same sort of trouble that carp anglers went to. And I couldn't see the point of sitting by a riverside fishing for big wary barbel knowing that I was using the same sort of bait that other people were using. And I did start off fishing with luncheon meat, cheese, worms, maggots, sweet corn, fishing over beds of hemp, and the barbel are definitely wary of these sorts of baits. I mean, let's face it, it's been used for over 40 years. So what we now need to do is think about adding a different string to our bow when it comes to baits for barbel. And this is what makes these modern designer barbel baits that we're discussing now and have become so popular very effective, particularly if we use some of the knowledge gained by carp and tench anglers and bring it to the rivers to fish for barbel. The addition of flavours and additives is a key element that works so brilliantly in rivers, and the reason that it works so brilliantly in rivers, much better in actual fact than it does in lakes, is because rivers have a current, they have flow. So you can pull fish out of the snags with a good, preferably water-soluble flavour, but you can also do this with oil-flavoured baits. For example, Barbel Search 4 is oil-flavoured. This one I'm holding, Ala Solar, particularly good as a flavour blend. It's also oil-based. You can use it 50-50 with Barbel Search 4. A deadly additive, again, another one of my flavours, Musk Spice, oil-based, but deadly both in summer and in winter. For winter time, I'd recommend that you would use more solvent based flavours or naturally based flavours, such as this one, cream caramel, particularly good with frost and flood base mix and super milk base mix, which are creamy, milky base mixes, and the cream caramel flavour is very good. So too is the frost and flood flavour. So what you're looking at is complementing the confectionery base mix with confectionery flavour, and the savoury base mixes such as savoury spice base mix or original base mix with a savoury flavour. So meatball flavour, ala salar flavour, these are amino reacted meaty flavours which actually have proper natural extracts in them. And when the paste and the boilie breaks down in the current, it carries little particles of the flavour and additive downstream and pulls the fish out of their snaggy homes up towards where you're fishing. This is what stands out and makes these baits so much more versatile than luncheon meat and standard hemp, that sort of thing. You can still use these additives. They're great baits. I don't knock them, it's just that I don't use them. There's another additive you can use too. This one here, particle punch, particularly good in all particle baits. You can use it to flavour hemp, tares, sweet corn, very good for winter flood fishing with sweet corn. Literally tip 10 ml into a tin of sweet corn, shake it all up, leave it to stand overnight, and you've got a completely different smell and taste to your corn as opposed to using the standard stuff straight out of the tin. The actual permutations of using flavours and additives is endless. So what you can do is use it for ground baits, you can use it for the method mix. There's absolutely a whole host of things you can use these additives for, but it's having the confidence to use them that will set you apart from other anglers. What I've always said is that 10% of anglers always seem to catch 90% of the fish. So I suppose the controversial bit here is that, do you want to be one of the 90% or do you want to be one of the 10%? Because if you want to be one of the 10%, then you need to add modern thoughts, modern methods and tactics to the traditional rivercraft and watercraft that you already have. And that's a very significant and important thing when it comes to successful modern pressured barbel fishing. In fact, I've just completed the first ever book on the subject of modern barbel baits and tactics, and I had a great deal of input from Stuart and Guy, so it's a good read and certainly contains a lot of subjects that we've discussed in this video. Well, it's not only Stuart and Guy who take camcorders with them when they go fishing. I was lucky enough to have a video camera with me recently. There we go. Very, very short, thick fish. Absolute cracker. I had to use a 5.5 ounce lead to hold the bottom. The river's quite high. It's been raining a lot the last couple of weeks, and I needed 5 ounces to hold bottom. But this fish had no problem giving me indication, and it fought like hell in the current. Absolutely excellent. There she is. Hopefully this will come out. I'm going to put her back now. Bye. As you saw, I really enjoyed catching that fish, but I do feel I owe a lot of that capture to Stuart and Guy. They've really rekindled my enthusiasm for fishing, but let me tell you, they are definitely the best exponents of catching big barbel that I've ever met, as well as being really, really good company. And I'm now going to pass you over for a real visual feast. Wait until you see Stuart Morgan and Guy Robb in real action.
Yeah, cheers, John. Well, most of the big fish that me and Stuart have caught over the last couple of seasons have come from the River Ouse. It's a fantastic little river, maybe much maligned by a few, but I've been on there for about the last 6 or 7 years, and some of the fish in it are truly fantastic. Many years ago, barbel were introduced into this area, and it's amazing how they've grown on. Subsequently, the EA have done some electrofishing on the stretch and have taken the large barbel and stripped their eggs out. They've raised these eggs until they become tiny barbel and reintroduced them again to the river. Who would have thought then that these fish would be so famous? A few years ago, I was lucky enough to catch the ooze record, which stood at 15.14. A couple of days later, Stuart went out and caught the Bristol Avon record at 15.9. Of course, we were over the moon at this point, so where did we go from here? Well, this was about the time we started to play about with our camcorders, and we were both very keen to get one of these really big fish on video. Well, we exceeded our wildest dreams, as we hope these sequences show you. Well, this was the first fish that we managed to catch when the video was there. But the trouble is, when you're videoing with just two of you, like me and Stuart were, is that when you catch a fish, all hell tends to break loose. And by the time he's got up there with a video camera, I've already netted it.
He plays him too hard, that's why.
Some of the fish in the video, Len was around to take the video footage, so you do get the fight as well, which was a bit of a bonus, really. This fish was really special because I managed to catch it during the day, and we'd only baited a spot for a couple of evenings beforehand, and I wandered into this swim basically between the two areas that we'd baited with a small amount of bait, single hook bait, into the water, and literally within 2 minutes the rod had heaved over. I was screaming and hollering, and by the time Stuart got there, it was netted.
I was about 400 yards away there, mate. Give me a chance.
Another ooze big one. Some people will tell you they don't count, but I think they do.
Well, of course, they all do count, and they're not all easy to catch. We catch quite a few of ours in the first 2 minutes of casting out, but sometimes, especially in my case, this next fish will show you that it took 2 weeks of fishing before I got my first ooze big one. This is my first large fish from the ooze, weighing in at 14.1. Gone quite a few biteless trips in bad weather conditions before I've picked this one up, so I'm particularly pleased being the first one. It's got a black spot on its nose, and I can see a black spot on its pelvic, so I'll definitely recognise this one if this one shows up again. But it's a short, chunky fish. First nice one. Its eyes are really good nick. The whole fish is in good condition. It fell to another one of JB pastes. Very satisfying. A lot of these ooze fish, the weight seems to come in the depth of the body of the fish, and they're quite, I'm going to try this, they're quite kind of wide across the shoulders. Not sure whether that'll come out too well on the camera, but definitely the weight there is in the girth. It's quite a short fish, as I've said before. You wouldn't think that would go 14.1. If that was on another river, that would probably be 13, but certainly on this river at the moment, they seem to be ahead of the rest of the rivers, and they're up in weight. So I'll just put her back now. There we go. Lovely fish. Right. I must admit, when I saw Guy catch that 16.7, it was a fantastic fish on the bank, biggest barbel I've ever seen, and positively massive against the 14.1 that I caught, and I honestly didn't think we were going to see another bigger barbel than that for the rest of the season. But as you'll now see, Guy was about to change that with a bigger fish. Here we are on the banks of the ooze. Guy has yet again caught a big fish, and we're pleased to say that you're now looking at the new British barbel record as of today at 17 pounds 8 ounces, subject to the scales coming back okay. Massively fat fish, really beautiful. Let's give you
Well, if ever there was a fish that did show me the importance of rigs, this was the one. This fish, believe it or not, took me 3 days to catch in coloured water, so I couldn't see it. But every time I went fishing and cast out, no matter what rig I used, this went dink, and that was it. And I kept on going and kept on going, kept on changing rigs, and eventually I had to scale down to a size 10 hook with a scrap of bait on, no bigger than about 5mm.
tiny.
Flicked it into a raging river, and the Robb went over. And it was obviously, you know, the best fish I've ever caught. But I tried everything. I tried semi-fixed leads, size 6 hooks, moulded around with paste, and I had to go down to a running lead in the end with about a 2 foot long tail and a tiny little hook just to get a bite off this fish. Incredible. People that tell you that barbel just drag the rod in, You have not seen nothing like this fish. It's a really hard fish to catch, but very pleasing.
Well done, mate. That's a tremendous fish.
Probably the most fascinating thing about the fish, and possibly the most unexpected thing about the fish, is that I confessed to catching this fish in October of the season before, and it weighed 15 pound something, 15.6, and here it is within a space of months, a British record. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, those fish, the way they've grown on that venue now, I think it's down to, like I said, the mild winters we've got now, and they're feeding for a lot longer. There is lots of good quality food going in on a lot of stretches now, but to see the phenomenal weight gain from summer to winter over this period of a year was incredible. We just didn't expect a fish that size to come out that early. Just going to video the weighing procedure now for the record. Fish has already been witnessed independently and verified on a second set of scales, but it's very windy, so we just wanted to check that true weight out of the wind and on a tripod type setup. What we're using is a landing net pole onto the scales, and that can be held firm. It's gone round. I'm going to try and zoom in on the scales. Hold it steady, guy. Hold it. That's good. You can see on the scales. Hold it there, guy. 17. Hold on. There's the 17.8 and a bit, and we said 17.8 is fine. Here's Guysy with the British record. We're just about to let the beast go.
Hope to catch it again one day.
Yeah, I can't see it going much bigger.
Massive, isn't it?
It's pretty big, and we're near the end of the season, so just letting her recover properly. There she goes, Guy.
Poor old Stuart had been struggling away for days and weeks on end, getting very bottom lippy about the whole subject. But sooner or later it was due to come right for him, so take a look at this.
£17 of ooze magic. PB for Stewie. 31.5 inches in length from fork to nose. By 20 and a quarter. There we are. Big fat fish. Let's get her back. Beautiful condition, eh? Well done. Yeah, I must admit it did seem at one stage that I didn't think I was ever going to catch a bigger fish than that 14-1. All I was doing is being a photographer for Guy here. But it did come good in the end, and I must admit I worked hard, and me and Guy pretty much had it sussed out after a few weeks when we thought the fish were going to feed and where they were going to feed. And it was quite good on the day I caught the 17 that Ray Walton was on hand, and he was there obviously to help with the photographs and all the rest of it. And it's always good when you share experiences like that with your mates. And I must say, Ray, the one thing that did happen, I'm glad Guy was there that day, because Ray will always try and knock that ounce off you to make that 17-pounder a 16-15. But however much he bounced the scales and tried to make it go, it stayed at 17.
That's a real bad spotlight on the fish. Is that me?
Yeah.
Or you?
No, it's Stuart's head. That's right. Headlight.
It's your headlight. You need it off.
So I'll take your headlight off, Stu.
Let's take two with minus the miner's helmet.
Look at me, Stu. Oh, I've got a boot.
That's on camera. Well, take three.
Shit. Come in, piss. Wait.
Good job, because so have I.
Of course, after my 17, it wasn't long before this jammy git was in again. As usual, I was 500 yards downstream when I heard the yelp from Guy that he was in. So let's take a walk along the bank and see what happened. Hello, Guy. You got one?
Yeah.
Is it a big one?
Not just big, it's massive.
Let's have a look. My God, that is big.
Yeah, I had it first chuck.
First chuck. Take it up and see if we can unhook it.
It's really nice to catch these barbel in the day because you can get a real good close look at them. This fish is absolutely immaculate. In my opinion, it probably will go on to be the biggest barbel record in the ooze. It is a magnificent fish.
It is, I have to say, it's the best conditioned fish I've seen in all the time I've been fishing up there and all the time I've been fishing full stop. It's just fantastic.
The length is so much bigger than the other ooze barbel. I mean, the barbel record fish at the moment, as we're speaking here, a couple of years on, is over 19 pounds now. But it hasn't got the potential, in my opinion, to do what this fish will if it reaches it.
Yeah, I mean, how long is this one? This one's about 32.5 inches,
Yes,
isn't it, from the tip of the nose to the fork of the tail, so it's a really big fish, and if it fills out, it could do a huge weight.
It's actually the frame of it as well. It's a very bullish looking creature.
It's thick all the way down to the tail, isn't it? All the way down.
Thing again. Again, I just fished a small stringer over a bed of boilies, and I'd been there for about half an hour, just sprinkling a little bit of paste in over the top of this to bring the smell up the little patrol route that I was fishing close in. And the rod went over.
You got it first chuck, didn't you? You got it for, I think it was first cast, wasn't it? So, yet again, it was one of those fish where you cast out and it just wait there a few minutes and bosh, away it goes.
Yeah, it's all a lot of this fishing looks simple, but it's still down to, you know, I've known the river for a lot of years and have spotted these fish swimming in Pacific areas on this river. You could narrow it down to a foot or two where you've got to put that hook bait, and if you get it on the right spot, you're going to catch.
How big's that one then, Guy?
16-14, and I'm very happy.
Super. Excellent. Okay.
Well, they just about wrapped it up on the ooze for that season. I went for a dabble on the Thames, easy fishing. I don't think so. And Stuart went back to the Bristol Avon.
Yeah, I must admit, Bristol Avon being my local river, I always try and end the season with a fish from that river. I don't quite know why, because we'd had all those phenomenal fish between the two of us up on the ooze, but I did manage a big one. I think it was 2 days before the season finished. I dropped into a swim I knew, never had a big fish from it before, and delighted to get this 14.9.
We'll move on a season now, and you will find that the video footage in this is a damn sight better than the last one, because we've got Len on board now. And he was lucky enough to be there to capture Stuart's record-breaking success.
Right then, let's get this fish weighed. Got the scales there, please. Right, if you can get that tripod, Guy. And now, it's going to be, you have to move the tripod forward. You tell me what she's going to weigh.
Would say that is 17.10, which beats my record.
Just beats Guy's record by ounces. I actually say I'm going to do myself out of an ounce. I'm agreeing on 17.9. I don't think it's quite on the 17.10.
Well done, mate.
Thanks very much. Job well done. 17.9. Excellent, let's get her back in the water a minute.
Yeah.
Okay then. This is the fish I've just caught, which has just been weighed at just over the current British record. It weighs 17 pounds 9 ounces, and it's a beauty. I feel so privileged to be on this river catching fish of this stamp. The amount of preparation work that we've put in with me and Guy over the last couple of seasons is really started to pay off. And I had 1:17 last year, and Guy had his record at 17.6 3/4, and I thought that was going to be the biggest barbel I was ever going to see. And I've come along here in a swim that I've never fished before, just behind me, a brand new swim. I put some bait in yesterday, I came back in today and I caught it first cast. Bait was in the water about 20 minutes, and the rod hooped over. Oops, steady on. She's wants to go, obviously. Let's hold her in tight. Let's see if I can give you a... Come on, calm down. There she is. What a beauty. They're just such fantastic conditioned fish. These ooze big fish, they just take some beating. See if I can show you the other side. Oh. Just seem to be scale perfect. I mean, the width of the fish crossed between the pecks. They've got big, broad, deep bellies on them. They just look like they've never been caught before, though I'm sure these probably have at a lower weight. And it really stands us in good stead now, I think, if we keep fishing this stretch. It could produce anything. I mean, we could really realistically expect this fish at 17.9 now will probably spawn out and probably get up to maybe 18 pounds, 18 and a half. And there's other fish on the stretch as well that we're still pursuing that we've yet to catch. But just fantastic, I'm speechless. She's been out the water for a minute now, so I'm just going to get her back and give her a breather and put her back in the net and rest her for a few minutes. So, ta-ta for now. Right, can you see what we're doing? Well, the British record by a few ounces. Wow, I'm just going to let it go now. Who knows? By the time this video's finished, we might even see a bigger one. I wouldn't hedge any bets against there not being a bigger one by the time the season's out, because we're only in the first few days in December. I've rested her in the net for a while, so I think she's pretty much going to want to go straight away. There she goes. Of course, when you catch a new record, the best person to have on the bank to witness it is the previous record holder. That way they make sure that you haven't overweighed the fish, and I can assure you Guy was weighing it really carefully. But it's nice to have him on the bank anyway, because he basically just helps out, and then you don't feel so guilty then when you've just taken the record off of him. But it was a smashing fish. Well, that first record was caught on the 11th of December, and I must admit Guy hadn't actually set foot on the banks at all that year. He decided to give it a bit of a miss, as he'd had such a good season before, so he didn't deserve to be on the bank really. But no, I was up there giving it a go, and I decided this year that I was just going to put in 5 or 6 days fishing. I'd not been on the ooze all summer, all autumn, so I just decided to have a concerted effort over a 6-day period, and I didn't in my wildest dreams think that I was going to break my own record again 9 days later. But as it was, 20th of December, couldn't face going Christmas shopping for another time, decided to go fishing, did a 200-mile round trip up to the ooze again. Wasn't in the swim long, it was raging with flood water. I needed an 8-ounce lead. That rig that I showed you earlier on in the winter section with the big polo clock watch lead or whatever they're called, basically was what was needed to hold the bottom. Put it out there, got a small bite, missed the first one, put it straight back out, and the big fish picked up the bait first time round. Being so close to Christmas on the 20th, I was struggling for witnesses. I phoned up John Baker, he couldn't make it, couldn't get hold of him. Phoned up Guy, couldn't get Guy. So in this case, I decided to be Mr. Popular and phone up the Angling Times. And it was the night of their Christmas party. So I must thank Mick Rouse and his friend for coming out and witnessing that fish for me and weighing it and all the bits and bobs, because I was totally blown away, and I pulled them out of their Christmas party. So Mick, when you came off the dance floor, it was worth the trip. It's up to you boys to read it. I'm going to have no part to play in this.
I make that 17 pounds 14 ounces. You were spot on, Peter. Do you agree with that? 17.
Everybody happy at 17 pounds 14 ounces.
Put it there, sunshine.
Thanks very much, Mick.
Well done, mate. Twice in a week.
Thanks very much.
A new British record.
Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic.
That's absolutely brilliant. Hold it there. I'm just going to come in a little bit closer. Hold it there again. Fantastic. Hold it there. Brilliant. Big smile. Come on, this is a record, sunshine. That's good. And again.
And now turn around and we'll do the other side. And she can go straight back without any further ado.
Super job.
Make sure there's no grass on her one more time.
Flip, right?
Yeah, just on the anal fin, look, that's it. And there's a couple of pieces on the belly there.
Just by the belly, by the pec there,
That's
pelvic.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Just hold it just like that. You don't need to move her any further, Stuart. That's
Okay.
fantastic. Wonderful. That's brilliant. I'm just going to come around. You've got a grass right behind, growing out of your head. Just bring the tail around just slightly more towards me. Hold her there. That's lovely. Okay, you're going to like this one.
3, 2, 1. Let's make it a good one.
End of film. Let her go back.
There she is. She's ready to go. I'm releasing the second record. I caught the first one at 17.9 last Monday, and we said on film that we thought there was a possibility of a bigger fish coming out. Little did we know that I was going to catch it, and it was 17.14, and it came less than a week after the first one. Early Christmas present. 20th of December, caught the fish at 7:45. Job done. Well, we're coming to the end of the video now. We've enjoyed it. It's been like war and peace putting this together. We started off with over 35 hours of footage to try and edit down to this final version. So it's been arduous at times, but always enjoyable. And I certainly would like to thank everybody involved who helped us put this video together, especially Lengard, because the editing involved was absolutely horrendous. But I hope you've all enjoyed it. Over to Guy.
Yeah, the beauty of video is it can make things look easy. And we spent a lot of hours on the bank blanking, the same as everybody else. But some of these methods, if you do use them and try to apply them to yourselves and your own rivers, we're pretty sure will help you catch a lot more. And get into perspective that we're fishing for these big ooze barbel, and they're not all like that on all rivers, but the same methods will apply and you will catch more fish, and we just hope you get something out of it.
It's goodbye from me. See you again.
And it's goodbye from me. Now go on then, we'll have one more chuck.
As ever, I couldn't resist another cast, and even though I just caught a record, one last cast is always the one to make. Oh dear, this is pulling hard. My God. That is... Can't stop that fish. It's right in by the tree. My God. Some serious pressure on this. If this comes good, this feels really big. Can't do anything with it at all.
This could be off the planet.
This could be a massive fish if this comes in. I can't even move it, the rod's locked completely out. There it is. It's starting to come now. Oh, this feels big. Very big. That was the third pickup I had from that fish. Oh dear. Right. It's coming up in the water. Let's get ready with that net boil. She's underneath my rod at the minute, going to pumping away. Here she comes. Hold on. She's coming up. Oh, whoa, she's going. Come on. She's coming up. You can see that. This feels quite big. She's coming right under the rod top. Hang on, there it is. She's going to come right up in the camera light. I do believe. Hold on. There she is. Get ready with that net, Guy. Hang on. She's going to come up. Get the net in the water now. So she's going to bring her in. Hang on, not yet. Whoa, she's not ready. There she is, right close in, Guy. No, she's not in. Oh. Another ooze big one. What can I say? British record half an hour ago. Another ooze big fish. A few kg bites, and then just wrapped the rod over. I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. Right, let's get a look at her. Oh.
That is a big fish.
This is just unbelievable. I cannot believe it. Look at
that. Is a very big fish.
that. Is not your. I don't recognise that one. Just flip it over and have a look at the other side. Nope, I don't recognise that. I've not caught that one before.
Nor have I, no.
That looks like that one might be a fish that neither me or Guy's got caught. We'll just put it back in the water a minute and then I'll go and run up and get the scales, because as usual they're up the bank where I caught the other fish. Back in a minute. $14.5. And yet when I was playing that, I thought that was going to be a fish about 16 pounds, because that really did fight hard. Another one.
Well done, mate.
Again, absolutely awesome. Another excellent condition fish. Really good fight. This place is magic.